Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We are super excited that you're joining us for today's episode of the show. And today on the podcast, we are really excited to be joined by Heath and Alyssa Padgett.
Yeah, and there's a fun backstory behind how this interview came to be. While we were in Japan, especially in those early couple weeks, we're finding Lou was waking up really early in the morning, and I would usually take her out to do something. And Japan, I think, surprisingly isn't really a morning place. There's a lot of people going, all over the place at all times, but lots of cafes, lots of restaurants don't open super early in the morning. And so walking around Kanazawa, lugging our little baby around, and I find another foreign-looking guy with a similar-aged toddler waiting around outside of a Starbucks. And so that turns out to be Heath. We spark up a conversation, find that we have a ton of stuff in common. Him and his wife, Alyssa, have a really interesting backstory and doing tons of cool stuff as a family traveling. And so I thought, we've got to get these guys on the podcast and dive into their full backstory, which I'm excited to do today. Now that we're back in Mexico, we caught up with them. And so Heath and Alyssa have a long bio full of tons of interesting stuff. They have written books, they've run a conference, they've gone to all 50 states RVing, as well as gone to Europe, Italy, France, and most recently, RVing and camping around Japan. So tons of interesting travel stuff. And over the past 8 years, have really followed a cool path to build a career, a lifestyle, and a family. And so we're excited to dive in and talk all about it today.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk a little bit about their journey as travelers, entrepreneurs, and parents, including why they love traveling the world by RV, how they've been able to strike a balance between working and traveling, because that's something that is a huge part of their story and something that they've been working quite actively on over the last 8 years. And we also talk a little bit about what it was like traveling Japan in an RV. As you guys know, if you listen to the last, 4 episodes of the podcast about our trip to Japan, we did not travel Japan by RV, and it sounds super cool. We also talk about what's next for them travel-wise and much more. So there's a lot of good stuff in this interview. Heath and Alyssa are pretty awesome, and we hope that you enjoy it. And just before we get into the interview, we just wanted to make a quick little announcement and give you guys a quick little update about the podcast. We have a pretty busy summer ahead with some travels, heading back to Canada to see some family and friends, as well as a bunch of work obligations and projects. So we've decided to take a little summer break from the podcast. So we will be offline for the next couple of months, not recording or releasing new episodes. But don't worry, we'll be back in September with new interviews, new episodes, and updates on travels then. So we hope that you guys have a great summer. We are so grateful that you continue to listen, and we hope that you enjoy this last episode before we take a little pause.
Heath and Alyssa, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Yeah, very excited to talk. So the backstory on us connecting was I was out, I can't remember what time it was, pretty early in the morning in Kanazawa looking for a coffee. I think it was like showing up right as Starbucks was opening, and then saw another fellow traveler with kids, another dad on the move. And so Heath and I had a great conversation there and have since connected. So one of the things that really stood out to me was hearing about your guys' backstory, the way you were traveling, which was like totally different than the way we were traveling in Japan. So really excited to hear about your trip in Japan. To kind of kick things off, I'd love to hear kind of how you guys started to travel and specifically got into RV travel.
Do you want to take the lead?
Sure.
Okay.
We started out traveling mostly just out of discontent after graduating college and going straight into office life. And we went from, being around friends and having all this freedom and everything to we were inside all day long. We weren't interacting with people as much anymore. We weren't getting to do as many fun things. And we were kind of like, oh my goodness, is this adulthood? Like, is this really what people do for 40, 50 years before they retire? Because that sounds terrible. And so we started dreaming up ways that we could maybe take a little break and travel. And we came up with the idea of going to all 50 states. And we got into RVing simply because that was going to be the best way for us to be able to travel around the country and see everything while still being economical because we looked at hotels, we looked at Airbnbs and driving our car and everything. And that was just going to be very, very expensive. So we found ways that we could camp for free and things like that, and just really fell in love with the RV lifestyle and the ability to get off the beaten path and away from more of the touristy areas and get outside and get in nature and see beautiful places.
I had also proposed the idea of like an inflatable air mattress in the back of our Honda CRV. And so between that and hotels, an RV was a happy medium.
Yeah.
I love that. It's really cool to hear that because I feel like our story really aligns with that in a lot of ways. Like just feeling this like working jobs where we were like, people just really do this until they're like 65 and then they retire and then they like quote unquote enjoy life. And that's not to say that you can't have a career that you're passionate about, because I feel like that was part of our journey too, was like, okay, how can we find something that we're passionate about doing that brings in sustainable income while also living a life that we feel excited about, which I know is a part of your journey too. And it's just really cool to meet people who are aligned with that too, because I feel like so often I'm like, am I the only one that feels like this? Like, is there something I'm missing, or like, is there a wire crossed in my head? Like, what's going on here?
I feel like that's been the continued conversation for us throughout our marriage. I saw y'all started the podcast maybe in like 2014. That was the year we got married and started traveling. And that's just been the thread throughout life. And now it's changed with having babies, as you guys know as well, which is how do we continue to have a life that we're excited about and that, you know, we're passionate about, but also, you know, do things that we enjoy in our work, and now throw in raising good humans with that too. So that's kind of the questions of our life right now.
Yeah. So you guys have this idea of like, we're going to go to all 50 states. What was it like kind of like sorting out the logistics, finding an RV, learning how to drive it? And then what did that like actual first trip look like?
It was chaotic, but we were 23 at the time. So like we were young and stupid enough and naive enough that I was like, we're just going to throw caution to the wind and we're going to buy this RV off of Craigslist and hope that it makes it across the country, which it only broke down on us once. And that was like in our second state. So we like started off on a really low note of having really high mechanic bills. And then it made it the rest of the way for us, which was an amazing blessing. But it was really just a crash course. I mean, now RVing is so popular to the point where it's hard to get campsites anywhere. But back then it really wasn't, you know, this big digital nomad movement that there is now. And so there weren't many resources out there for us to really learn the ropes and figure it out. So we just did a lot of trial and error and trying to not crash.
Yeah. At one point we were driving the Pacific Coast Highway and I just look at Alyssa, and I kind of had forgotten about this and she reminded me of it years later, but I looked at her and I said, "Hey babe, our engine was overheating." And I said, you know, if I look at you and say, like, we got to go, just, you know, we'll open the doors and we'll tuck and roll.
Oh my God.
And in the moment, like looking back, I'm like, I had to have been joking.
He was not joking.
But I don't think I was joking in the moment because our engine was overheating. And I mean, it was a 20-year-old RV at that point when we bought it.
Because I asked you, I was like, we're just going to jump out and let it fly over the edge of this cliff. And he's like, do you want to fly over the edge of the cliff or do you want to jump out?
Luckily, it was all fine. I mean,
we made it.
Yeah, it was all good. I just, flushed the radiator or something like that. And it was better. So
to be 23 again.
It's like, I don't know how those words like left my mouth casually, but
yeah.
That's so funny. And so on that first trip, you guys went to all 50 states, or what did it look like actually crossing all 50 states off?
We did 7 months, the lower 48. And so basically, to give a little bit more context to the journey, we decided we want to go to all 50 states, maybe find a new place to live that, you know, was kind of like break up our status quo as getting married. And I wanted to do some type of work, make some money along the way. So I pitched Alyssa on the idea of working a job in all 50 states. I thought it would be a fun project. She thought it sounded like work. And then I found a sponsor for that. Like I sent a cold email to a big job board in the US called Snag a Job. They help people find jobs. And I told them what we were doing. And we didn't have a blog or website or social media or anything like that. And for some reason they said, we'll give you $1,000 a month and, you know, pay for some of your gas and send us some film equipment to make a documentary about this. And we had no experience doing that. So along the way, we were kind of doing this documentary project as well. So we did 7 months, lower 48. And then we flew to Hawaii, and then we drove the Alaskan highway with my parents and grandparents in a 29-foot RV the next summer. So we did basically everything in a year.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's super impressive. That's really cool.
Yeah, what were kind of other than almost dying on the Pacific Coast Highway and the RV off-cliff incident, what were kind of the highlights of the trip?
A big highlight was the ending, which I got to work. So a lot of my jobs were in quick service, or I worked on dude ranches and things like that at Buffalo Wild Wings. But in Alaska, I worked a job with the National Park Service. So they flew us in a helicopter up to Mount Denali, and we got to sleep on a glacier overnight, shadow the park rangers. That was a really cool experience because I'd never been on a helicopter. I got to stay the night on a glacier. We were so novice at camping that we didn't even realize that we were supposed to have sleeping pads. And so we just threw our sleeping bags in the tent on the ice. And we're like, tent camping sucks. Like, we're just literally soaking wet. We ended up like both
freezing cold.
And freezing
We were
cold.
so cold.
And the next morning they're like, how'd you sleep? I was like, honestly, terrible. And I told her, he's like, oh, we have a stack of pads over here. We should have, given anyway. But that was a really cool experience minus, a poor night's sleep one night.
It's a good story now about how bad we are at camping.
We had to learn. I mean, yeah.
I'm sure you're
Took us
much better
50
at camping now.
Yeah, we've learned.
I think one of the biggest highlights for us, though, actually, we had a lot of cool experiences with jobs, but we didn't at the time, kind of, as you guys have mentioned, am I the only ones that have an interest in living this life? When we've told our family and friends what we were doing, they thought we were crazy. I mean, at the time, our hashtag for our wedding, because that was a cute thing people did in that moment, was like Breaking Padgett, because Breaking Bad was a thing and we were getting in the sketchy RV. So we were all having a good laugh about this. But we didn't have anyone in our lives who we kind of had support, but not really for what we were trying to do. And a month into our trip, we went to a conference in Oregon called World Domination Summit. And we just kind of happened to find it along our route. It was hosted by a guy named Chris Gillibo, went on for 10 years. And it was just kind of a gathering of digital nomads, entrepreneurs, and things like that. And we ended up plugging into that group and just kind of meeting a lot of people who were living the life we wanted to live. So basically, we had gotten a taste of this whole, hey, we're working from our RV. We're making a tiny bit of money, not much to sustain, but we could kind of see a path where this would be a really fun and interesting life that we could live. And then we met a lot of people there who affirmed that this wasn't a crazy dream, that we can make it a reality. So there wasn't a specific instance, but it was like, it kind of let us know that we could do this for a while, which led us to being on the road full time for 6 years, traveling around, and now getting to do it with our kids. So.
Yeah, that's cool. That's actually what I wanted to ask next, because I feel like our experience has been like, you have this like goal or this thing you want to do, and you set out for a certain period of time, and then you do it. And I feel like a lot of people who haven't done that stuff just expect you to kind of go back to what you were doing before. Like you get another like full-time corporate job, you move back to where you were. But I feel like these types of experiences so profoundly change you and the way you look at the world that it's like, how do you go back from that? So I was kind of curious, like what it was like for you. You guys finished the 50 states. Like, what did you do next?
Absolutely. It drove me crazy because people would be like, when are you going to be done with your trip? And I'm like, no, like this is not a trip. This is, we're going to find a way to make this our lifestyle. And that was kind of what our initial idea was with Heath working a job in all 50 states was we had to find a way to make money. We have no idea how to do that. We don't have like incredible business acumen. I mean, we were kids. There was no grand ideas or skills that we had that we felt like we could monetize at the time. We just had these crazy dreams of finding a way to make money while we were traveling. And so that was kind of our goal as soon as we finished all 50 states was anything we can do that will pay us. We are going to try it while we are traveling, while we're living in the RV. And fortunately, like we just happened to hit into this RVing space at a time when RVing was starting to boom and being a digital nomad was starting to become more common and remote work was starting to become more of an understood thing. And so as we grew our income and realized that maybe it was sustainable for us to keep traveling, it kind of became just a question of like, why did we stop? Why would we not travel if we've figured out this key component? Because I think the work component, the income component is the hardest thing for most people.
I mean, and specifically to add on top of that, like what we like precisely did that next year was because we've seen a lot of people, who save up for a year to go travel and their financial runway is like, I got 15 grand. I'm going to make the most out of this. I'm going to backpack, or I'm going to go wherever and do, however. And we had a similar kind of like runway in front of us. And the idea halfway through the trip was, how do we not go get a job? So after that first year where we burned through gas, it cost us 23 grand to go to all 50 states. So actually not that bad. I think we made 20 grand that year from just like patching together some freelance writing and stuff like that. So we weren't necessarily in the black, but we could see a path where if we kept working hard, we could figure it out. So we parked our 20-year-old RV at a little RV park outside of Austin for $360 a month that year, and kind of built out some business, like freelancing clients for video, because we had kind of built those skills. So
I was editing wedding videos.
So we kind of spent a little bit of time like paying down student debt and being a little stationary that next year, so we could not have to go back and get quote unquote normal jobs. And that was kind of like a period of hustle time. And then, we were able to figure out some things from there, but it was a little bit of like, we had a leaking roof and things. It wasn't all great, but the idea was it's better than us having to go back to this life where we don't get to spend our days around each other.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it makes me think about, as you were talking about it, it's kind of interesting because I feel like ours was obviously not in the RV space, but very similar. And it's kind of that like 2014 to 2018, 2019 period where like living a lifestyle like this kind of forces you to be entrepreneurial in a way that it doesn't today. Like I know for us, Chris Gillibo was a big inspiration, and we like took off to Southeast Asia and we're like, we need to find a way to make money because or else we're going to be stuck here. Which is, yeah. And then today it's like you said, becomes so much more popular. There's so many different more routes to do it, which is awesome for sure. I'm curious, kind of between then and now, how much of your nights would you say you've actually spent sleeping in an RV?
Between when and now?
Between then and now, like.
Then and now. Like from our honeymoon to now.
Oh, well, 6 years full time. Like we were in RV full time. So we didn't have a house. We didn't have an apartment. So that was until basically we got pregnant with our daughter in late 2018. And Alyssa was, TMI, but she was throwing up in an RV that was 24 foot. And we were in the middle of nowhere in Canada. We went to, what was the Canadian grocery store where we found out we were pregnant?
I don't know. It's like the Canadian version of Walmart.
It was like something Tire.
Oh, Canadian Tire.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So
we're Canadian, so
I knew that, so I figured you guys might know.
Canadian Tire is the best. I still feel like when I'm in other places, I'm like, why is there just no Canadian Tire like everywhere?
Well, they have like doctors' clinics in there.
George?
We were in Prince George, so we went to the Canadian Tire. We went to see the doctor there.
Yeah, so he was like, "Well, you got yourself pregnant." And so
need a tire change.
Yeah. So we have a package deal here for finding out you're pregnant and a tire. And so we drove back home. Like Alyssa's sister was pregnant at the same time. So like, let's get an apartment, have this baby. So we did that for a year, and then
hated it
in Texas. And we decided that wasn't for us. And so we got back into an RV for a year, which ended up being the COVID year. And so I guess maybe to answer your question short, 6 out of 7.5 out of the last 10 years.
We've also been like RVing around the world and done like 10 different countries in the past like year. So.
I have to break out a spreadsheet, Ryan. I'm not sure, but 70% of the time, maybe.
I would say, a big majority of our marriage has been in RVs, on wheels.
The last few years,
I think you did a good job answering that question without having the spreadsheet. I feel like it kind of pieces it together. And I totally get like having been pregnant myself in the last couple of years, being pregnant in an RV sounds kind of terrible.
Yeah, I'm like trying to make some food or Brussels sprouts, and Alyssa's like, "I'll kill you if you don't stop cooking this."
Oh yeah, just like the smells and morning sickness and just
phase where Amanda was asking you to open the fridge for her.
Oh, I just could not open the fridge in my first trimester. It was just like the smells that came out of it. I was like, I had no idea this fridge was so disgusting.
Yeah.
Like I really don't want to eat. I need to eat. I just need you to give me the butter so I can butter some toast. I can't smell all the other things in there.
Alyssa would be on a kick. She's like, "Are you using cumin?" Like I threw the cumin out a month ago because you kept asking me that. I haven't touched cumin, but she smelled it everywhere. Anyway, but the last few years, to kind of going back to the question, Ryan, was we have a home now in southwestern Colorado, and our travel has changed. We haven't been full-time RVing, but we've been doing these kind of extended trips, camping abroad. And that's just kind of been our mode of travel that we've enjoyed. We've gotten used to it. And so we've done New Zealand, France, Switzerland, Italy, and a handful of other countries in an RV with the kids. So we just got back from Japan and New Zealand. And but we actually have our house up for sale and we're moving out to go full-time now. So that's a whole thing we're excited and nervous about now with the kids.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I was going to ask, I feel like there's like definitely this point, like I know for us where you're kind of living this lifestyle, feeling more comfortable with it. And it's like, oh, we're going to have a baby. And it kind of makes you rethink everything. I think a lot of people are kind of like, we have like 10% salmon or something in us where we're like, I need to go like back home because I'm going to have a baby. But how did you guys kind of navigate that and like decide what you were going to do as it came to like building a family also with pursuing this kind of alternative lifestyle?
We were RVing in Canada and we were already thinking about like, do we want to keep full timing and have a baby? And we were kind of just thinking through that question and not really knowing the answer until we got the positive on the pregnancy test. And we're like, we're going to go back to Texas. And we were planning on staying in our RV. Like we had a big Class A, plenty of space for the pregnancy part of things. And then we thought we would travel again, but then just like being on wheels and not being stable, I was like, I can't do this. I'm getting motion sick walking in this RV right now. And so we ended up getting an apartment near my family thinking, well, we'll want to be near family. We'll want to be in one place. And then we realized the longer that we were in one place that we just weren't happy. We weren't as happy as we thought we would be with those, early months. And so before Ellie was born, I think I was like 8 or 9 months pregnant. We booked our first international trip as a family. And I remember Heath being on the phone with Delta being like, well, like we don't know her birth date yet or like her name. And they were like, that's fine. Just call us later. Like once the baby is born and we'll give her a ticket then. And just kind of being wowed, like, oh, okay. Like maybe traveling with kids isn't going to be too hard. And I think that was a big thing for us was getting our first trip on the book as a family when our baby was still really young and really little and we could just wear her and take her everywhere so that we could build up the confidence just that it was possible. Because it was just this giant question mark before you're new to parenthood, right? Like you have no idea what parenting is like. Maybe you know what travel is like. But adding them together, we were very, very overwhelmed at the prospect. So we got that first trip done pretty quickly. Actually, I guess we took Ellie on her first like RV trip when she was like 4 weeks old.
As a road trip.
Her first road trip. But we kind of went into it with the mentality of just try as soon as possible and figure out if it's something that you want to make work for you. And we decided we were going to lug the strollers and lug the baby beds all around the world and that it would be worth it.
Awesome. And then was that Europe, the first trip afterwards?
Yeah, that was our first trip to Europe together, right? That was your first time to Europe.
Yep.
Yeah. We decided to start with Italy, I think just because of Heath's obsession with pizza.
It seems like a logical first step. Yeah. We have a bunch of photos of Ellie crying while I'm eating gelato, like reaching for it. But like, she's not even old enough to know what gelato is. But like, she intuitively understood that this was the best thing in the world.
Yeah. Kids know. Kids are smart.
It's nature.
Yeah. It's funny. We were in Colombia and where Lou ate ice cream for the first time. We got like a dessert at a restaurant and she just like grabbed the spoon and like put it in her mouth. And
then was like,
eyes just like...
Yes.
She was like climbing on the table. Like I feel like she became like a feral animal to try to get more ice cream.
Yes.
Like I've never seen you behave like this before.
I imagine like, I feel like driving in Europe seems chaotic and hard. Driving an RV in Europe seems like next level. What was it like kind of planning that out, getting over there and making those first European RV trips happen?
So the caveat on top of that was most of the rentals in Europe, I think they're trending a little bit more automatic, but a few years ago, they were still predominantly manual. And I've never driven a manual in my life. And so I had a friend meet up with me one day before we booked our RV, which we were going to be driving for a month. And we drove around for 15 minutes in his Jeep and he showed it to me. And I guess I thought that was enough experience to go drive in the Italian Dolomites. So we picked our RV up in a grocery store parking lot just outside of Venice. And our friend Peter and John were with us. They had their own rig. And so he gave me some tips that day. So we drove around for maybe 20 minutes, maybe. And then we immediately drove into the mountains of northern Italy. And
but it worked out. Like Peter was a professional bus driver in New York City, and he taught bus drivers. So like he's a really good driving teacher. If there was any scenario in which I had Heath on his first day ever driving a manual in the steep mountain curvy roads, it would be, okay, we've got a driving instructor literally with us.
Yeah. So it was hard because there are very small villages, as you guys know, when you're driving through some of these European spots and, you're reading the signs and it says it's a little overwhelming because you're trying to understand this different language and everything else. And, some of these city centers, you can't take large vehicles into, you have to have a tag if you're driving into the city center. And so we messed up and drove into a couple of those that we weren't supposed to. It ended up working out fine. I stalled out on a mountainside and because I downshifted instead of upshifting or vice versa. I don't remember, but either way, I
shifted instead of downshifting.
I stalled it. And so he had to run to the RV. This is a whole other reason why we enjoy traveling with friends. And sometimes when you're pushing your comfort zone, it's like, oh, it's nice that we had people to help. So once we got the hang of that, I feel that was kind of jumping into the deep end. Like the first time I ever had coffee, I just drank it straight black and I was like, this is terrible. And then I went to Starbucks and had cinnamon dolce latte. And I was like, oh, this is incredible. Like, this is wonderful. Anyway, so that may be a terrible comparison, but the point is we jumped into a harder scenario of learning a manual, doing it in the mountains in small villages. And I think Italy is one of the harder countries we've driven in just because the medieval, the architecture is so old. But after just going to Japan, which was the easiest country we've ever driven a camper van in.
No, New Zealand's way easier.
New Zealand is easy too. But you really jumped in there to fact check me, didn't you?
Sorry. That's my job.
It's true. But yeah, Italy was challenged, but then it got a lot easier. And now there are a lot more automatic vehicles on the market. That was probably way too detailed of an answer, Ryan.
No, yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, and then you I think maybe we'll go into Japan because I'm really curious about that as us just finishing a trip in Japan. How did you guys decide hey, we want to do Japan, we want to do it in an RV? And what was that process like figuring it out? I imagine for us, the thought of driving Japan is a bit scary because we can't even kind of understand the signs. They're just the shapes and squiggles. Yeah. Talk us through the whole Japan trip.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it feels like you're driving in Mario Kart because of the signs on the roads. It looks, like Mario Kart. But honestly, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we saw a photo of a Japanese camper and they just
I think it was when we were in Italy. So I remember talking to John and Peter about us all going April 2020.
And they basically look like large go-karts. And I just thought that sounds like a lot of fun. And so that it kind of just planted that seed of it would be a fun adventure to do. And that's just been our mode of travel. And I think one of the reasons why we enjoy it, some countries, especially if you're going into cities, when we've done one-way rentals where we've started in Paris or dropped off in Rome, and we'll just kind of bookend our trip with Airbnbs and the cities we want to walk around. But a lot of times we like meandering through some of the smaller towns and just being able to park and walk around. And that's what we enjoy versus spending more time in the cities. And so that's why we thought about doing it in Japan is going to see Fuji and some of these smaller villages that, were a little bit further away. We looked at 2 routes from Tokyo to Kyoto, and one was going through a handful of large cities, mostly driving through their highways and their toll roads, which there are a lot of. And then there was another one that went up through these smaller kind of post towns. I don't know if you guys got to go to any of those, but they're really well preserved. One was called Magome Juku, and I don't think we would have went there had we not done it in an RV.
You would have to have a car.
You'd have to have a vehicle of sorts or get on one of those tour buses with 300 people type of thing to get there. And so those are some of the places we were really excited about going to, and an RV just made a little bit more sense for us. And we loved, being able to have our space with us and the kids and,
having the same bed to sleep in every night, especially with kids, is so valuable for us. To be able to feel like the kids have their own space and something that they recognize versus us changing hotels every 2-3 nights and dragging suitcases all the time. That's been a really big win, I think, for us for choosing the RV as a way to get around countries because they've got everything right there all of the time.
Yeah. But also when we met up with you guys and what was the town? Kanazawa. Like we had jumped in a hotel for the night because it was raining all day, and it's a 16-foot camper. So we're like, I don't want to be in the 16-foot camper while it's raining with our 2 kids. Let's go get a hotel. So we're not married to that as a mode of travel. So we'll jump in and out as it makes sense too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I feel like we should just I think clarify too. I think when you think camper RV, you think big car, but these Japanese ones
are small,
like smaller than like our Mazda kind of small SUV. Like they're tiny.
Totally.
Oh, for sure. It's definitely smaller than the SUV that we have in the States.
So we rented a car to drive to the Denver airport when we were going to Tokyo, and it was a minivan. And just for kicks, I measured it, and it was a foot, I think, longer than our RV in Japan. And the smallest vans in the US, like if you're familiar with the camping market in the US, are maybe the Travados or things like that from Winnebago, they're Sprinter vans. Those are kind of in the low 20 feet. So even your vans in the US are way larger than the camper that we had. So even going through, I accidentally got derailed one day, drove through downtown Tokyo when we were leaving, and, went through like big cities, and I could park in a parking spot, and it really wasn't very stressful at all.
Just like driving a car.
And we felt from a cultural perspective that, at least all the people we were around on Japanese roads were way nicer than other countries we've been at, where like if you make a mistake, someone's honking at you, flipping you off or whatever. I don't think I got honked at the entire time I was in Japan, and I'm sure I did something wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that just makes my heart warm because that's like so Japanese. It's just
car honk the entire time we were there.
Yeah, we were like, what's happening?
It was probably like a courtesy honk, like someone let them pass or something.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I feel like one of the things that would be really interesting to hear about when it comes to RV travel would be a little bit around kind of like the logistical side of things, like when it comes to what you need for driver's licenses, maybe insurance, if that's a consideration. Do you guys always book through like the same company? How do you find like the RVs you want to book with, all that type of stuff?
Most of the time when we rent an RV, insurance is all included. So we've used the same company twice in Europe. And we've used Wilderness twice in New Zealand. And for Japan, we just Google searched until we found a company that actually had availability during cherry blossom season. That was surprisingly difficult. But our big thing, not for Japan specifically, but for like Europe, where you're crossing multiple borders potentially, and there's so many places you can drive, is trying to find a rental company that does one-way rentals. So that's what we've done when we've been in Europe. So we've been able to go so many more places. And we went from Paris all the way to Barcelona and crossed across 6 country borders over the course of a month last fall. So that's like our biggest priority when we're looking at a rental company, is if we have that option so that we can cover more ground and see more things that way. But the insurance is always taken care of. And it wasn't until Japan that we needed to get an international driving permit, which was surprisingly easy. It was like $20 and we mailed in a form, and that was it.
I took my photo at Walgreens.
Yes, you did have to take a photo.
And the company that we've done anywhere one-way rentals in Europe is called Anywhere Campers. They've been really good. We've booked through and reserved through them a couple times. And in Japan, we posted there's a Japan discussion forum Facebook group that we were part of. There's like 100,000 people in there asking tons of questions. So a lot of people were kind of concerned or wondering about like how expensive tolls and things like that were. We drove a big loop starting in Tokyo. We went to Fuji. We went to around the Kyoto area, up to Kanazawa, which is, if you guys are familiar now with Japan, but it was a giant circle. So that was just over 2 weeks, and we drove a lot of miles, and
always on toll roads. We never clicked the avoid tolls on Google Maps, and it was $250.
And do you know how many kilometers we did roughly? I know we wrote it down.
I have it written down somewhere. Okay. I wanted to say it was like 2,000. But I might be mixing up New Zealand.
The point was, it wasn't very unaffordable. And I think we paid like $1,800 for our rental, which worked out to maybe $130 to $50 a day USD.
I don't remember.
For 2 weeks. Yeah. Sorry, we don't have all these in front of us, but it wasn't astronomical is the point.
Yeah. Considering, I mean, we just did a similar trip, but staying in like hotels and Airbnbs and stuff. And I feel like the cost of like I would say it was probably around that when you average everything out, maybe a little bit more, maybe closer to 200. So yeah, seems like a good option. And I also love what you guys were talking about just with having kids. And I feel like, this was a really interesting trip for us with Japan, because I feel like Lou kind of went from being like really very much a baby to kind of entering toddlerhood. And we didn't bring our travel crib with us because we wanted to do everything really lightweight, because we knew we were taking Shinkansens and we would have to carry everything, including, her. And so I found for the first time, like, oh, we get in an Airbnb, and I could tell she was like, oh, what is this space? Like, what is this bed I'm sleeping in? Like, it was different. So I think having kids that are a bit older than her, it definitely makes sense to, you don't have to do as much of that. Like, here's our space for tonight. Here's where we're going to sleep, like make sure they're comfortable. It's like, you just get them comfortable once and then you're just in that space. They can you can all set up and just be there. Like, that sounds great.
And as you guys know, life with kids is fluid. Mm-hmm. And we feel like we've been trying to dial in what life looks like and how work and travel all fit into kids. And I feel like by the time we get something a little figured out, they change. And so one of our last trips last year, we did 2 months almost in Italy because we love it. And so we keep going back, and we didn't do the RV that time. Like, we had an Airbnb, we were in for a month, and then we did hotels and bounced around to Paris and London. And I did remember like almost throwing my back out because we had a travel bed or something, and we didn't bring a stroller. So because we thought our 3-year-old would walk more, and that was dumb. So I carried her. And
no, remember, we like literally ran out of arm space. We just left our car seat at a hotel in Florence.
Oh yeah, we did.
We just left it. We're like, we physically are unable to travel with this anymore. And we just left it.
Yeah. And I was also doing a gravel bike thing. So we had anyway, the point was we've done and kind of went back and forth on both modes of travel. And, we do keep coming back to the RV, but yeah, we're going to Portugal this fall for 3 months, and we're going to just be in like our own Airbnb space because we're going to be stationary. So we're not like married to RV life. We just do enjoy it as a way to like get around and explore a place.
Yeah. When we were talking about it, I was like, I feel like that would be lots of places, but especially Japan, like a really cool way to get around and see the country, especially like, I think you've got to do like a bullet train one time to be like, this is super cool. But then you are really kind of stuck on like, the big cities, that type of thing, being able to see smaller towns. And Japan has incredible nature, like so many beautiful spots, which are hard to get to if you can't drive. When you guys
I think one
Japan,
of the, I was just going to say, and for someone that has kids as well, like some of our favorite experiences were, we stayed at some campgrounds outside of Mount Fuji, and like the way that they're set up are these giant fields, not really like hookups and, RVs that you see in America. It's 90% people in tents and maybe 5-10% vans, if that. But, our first night camping there, we got in the RV and it was dark and we hadn't really gotten the space, and, everyone was hungry. It took longer. It was raining again at Tokyo. And we're like, this was a terrible decision. Like, we should not be all in a 16-foot camper van. Like, there's no toilet on board. It's like an emergency toilet. That's a whole other thing. And so that first night we were like, this was a stupid, stupid idea. And then of course, like, we all got a night's sleep, and then we woke up the next morning to this amazing view of Mount Fuji. And there were all families around us in this little campground area. So everyone's like in this big circle. There's a fire pit in the middle. And for like 5 hours, our kids played with so many other children. Like, they were playing with each other's toys. Like, at the end of it, it was one of those things where we exchanged information with one of the families because they want to go travel in an RV in the US one day. And they're like, we'll see you again. And so that was something that was really fun and cool for us, as I felt like we got to interact, in a fun environment with some people. Like, another night we camped at a cafe with a family who owned the cafe and also lived there on site. And like, by that evening, I was like digging up bamboo shoots with the owner, and like we went and boiled them together. And so I feel like there were some fun experiences that we had because we, decided to be in an RV that we probably could have had otherwise, but maybe we wouldn't have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think too, I'm glad that you brought up just like, I feel like sometimes, especially those first nights or arriving in a new destination, there can be a lot of discomfort. And I think that that's not what we see on social media, right? It's not often what we're seeing online with travel, because in most cases, it's like, you wake up, everything's fine, you have a great experience, then that's what you're sharing, right? But I think part of the reality of this lifestyle and just traveling long-term in general is like having those like, oh crap, what have I done moments, like why are we here? I know we actually had that when we went to Colombia in January. It was the first big trip we'd taken since the baby. And the first night we arrived in our Airbnb, it was smaller than it looked in the photos, first of all. And we were spending like close to a month there. And the neighborhood beside the building we were in was having a party. I guess we arrived at like the neighborhood anniversary, and the party went until 6 a.m. the next day.
Oh.
And like, thankfully our daughter slept fine, like her white noise machine and like the air con, just like she just passed out and went to sleep. But Ryan and I were both like, what the heck? And we were like, what have we done? Like, this is terrible. And it was just like one bad night. It was like, our trip was amazing. We had an excellent time in Colombia. Would definitely recommend it, all the things. But just the first night was like, we're like, should we move Airbnbs? Like, should we go to a different location? Like, just this, like, we've made a mistake, kind of like what you were talking about.
Yeah, get that.
Yeah. I was going to say that just in regards to, I feel like there's, I feel like especially as we travel around, you go to big cities, you notice like a lot of big cities are kind of becoming more and more like each other. Like you've got similar stuff, similar chains, all that type of thing. And especially for us traveling with kids now, like there's more engagement with other people. But when you're in a hotel, you're in an Airbnb, it can be kind of, you're like a little bit more on your own. And like you said, being in those campgrounds, getting to know people, like it's such a social, or a lot more social context. And there's also this like really unique kind of like RV culture in different countries. Like there's caravan culture in the UK and RVing in the States. And like, I'm sure Japan has like its own kind of culture around that. So it's like a really cool, interesting lens to like connect with a different country and see a different place.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So I know you mentioned going to Portugal, but yeah, talk us through like you guys are selling your house, making a big move. Like what's the future look like for Heath and Alyssa and family?
We got back from Europe mid-October, and we were here in Colorado for the whole winter. And we were inside and it was cold and it snowed so much this year that we just kind of looked at each other by the time I think the end of February rolled around, and we hadn't booked anything for Japan or New Zealand. And we were like, we have to get out of this place. We have to. I don't care where we go. We have to go somewhere, anywhere. And that's what pushed us to book our most recent trip to Japan and New Zealand. But as we were prepping for that trip, we kind of just started asking the bigger question of, well, we were here for almost 6 months straight and we didn't super enjoy it. Do we really want to have a house? Like if we're not going to enjoy it for half of the year, and we really love Colorado in the summer and the fall, but winter's long. Winter's long out here in the mountains. And the more we started having that conversation and talking through it, we're like, you know what? Let's move out of the house and let's give this to another family for a bit and figure out if we're ever going to be house people or if we're just going to keep traveling full time. But for us, the biggest concern, because we are both working while we're traveling, is childcare. Like that's the hardest thing for any digital nomad family, I think, but especially if both parents are working or are wanting to work. And so we found a program called Boundless Life. If y'all have heard of it, found them on Instagram a while ago and had like an exploratory, call with one of their sales reps, I guess you would call them, to hear more about their program. And they have like 4 locations around the world right now. And they put your kids in their school programs. They have like a Finnish education center. And then they have a co-working hub for the working parents like us. And they find you an apartment or a house to live in. And the more we were talking to this woman, we were like, this is exactly solving all the pain points that we've experienced when we've been traveling as a family. This is giving our kids community. This is giving us community. We can still run our business. The kids can have friends and we can have some kid free time. Like they even do like date nights and stuff like that. And so we were like, we're listing the house for sale. We're going to go to Portugal in the fall. Their program, like the fall semester, starts the 1st of September. So we're just soaking up our last few months in Colorado as normal home dwelling people. And then we're going to hop over to Europe and not deal with the visa mess. So we're going to do their Bali location and head over to Asia then for the winter. And that's awesome. As far as we have our lives planned.
No, it's amazing. Some of our friends, maybe we can talk about this offline too. Some of our friends are doing their Italy program right now. And I know they did their Portugal one last fall, but I don't know if they're doing it again. So I'll find out.
Yeah,
Oh,
let
nice.
us know. We need
because
friends.
they're awesome. They're like full-time travelers too with young kids. I'd love to hear about you guys' work stuff. I know we kind of talked about the early days of work, and I know from looking through your website and stuff, you guys have books and a blog and videos and all that type of stuff. I know you guys have like built and sold companies, but would love to hear a little bit about what you guys are doing to finance everything.
Yeah, I'll try to give like a 60-second overview. So
60-second.
Ready
Every
to go.
time we open our mouths, I feel like we just keep talking forever.
So after we got off the road that first year, our frame was try to sustain ourselves. So we built the skills in video and we started doing freelance videography as kind of our primary income and some freelance writing. But we started getting clients. We're shooting everything from weddings to like promotional website videos or
Online courses.
Online courses was something we worked with creators and authors and things like that. So we did that for a few years while we were kind of paying down debt. And along that kind of similar path, we were still continuing to write and build the blog. I started a podcast called The RV Entrepreneur. And so I was interviewing people like this on how they made their life work. And we ended up turning that into a conference. I think our biggest year, we had like 400 plus people that came to that event. And we did that, worked with a lot of big companies. Alyssa published a book on kind of top questions people had asked about living in an RV. That ended up doing really well. And so that for a while sustained us completely, just, like book sales. And we were able to eventually, after 4 years, transition away from client work entirely. And the idea was like, now we can kind of own our time. And instead of having a bunch of mini bosses with clients, we can do like whatever work we want. And so for Alyssa, that was writing. And for me, that was, I wanted to start a software company. So I started Campground Booking, which is a booking site for campgrounds, built it for 5 years and sold it to Camping World. And then I feel like that is most of the stuff we've done.
And then we realized how many years it took us to build each different business that we had started as we were traveling. We're like, building something new takes a lot of time. Why don't we just buy an existing business, which is what we did in December. So we were able to buy the income with a blog that's on renovating RVs and kind of more interior design of RVs, which is something that we both love, but are terrible at. We're not renovators at all, but we can look at pretty pictures all day long. And so that's been our most recent endeavor is we've bought this blog and we're trying to, I don't know, what did we say? 10x it in 2 years and make a return on our money.
But the frame has kind of been like, we've oscillated between these modes of working really hard, trying to create something for ourselves. And also, hey, let's just coast off of book sales and some affiliate income and travel the world. And I feel like what we're kind of trying to do now again is blend those things. So for the last 2 months, we didn't work on the site while we were traveling. We have an editor and a VA who kind of does some things for us. And we're not trying to like grow something to lots of employees or make the biggest company in the world, but trying to build something that, we enjoy, but that can sustain travel for us as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Yeah, it's really awesome to hear that. And I feel like it's amazing to find that balance of kind of like I mentioned at the beginning, like doing something that you're really passionate about, and then also being able to like live a life that you're really passionate about and really excited about, and just kind of have that be one thing. Cause I feel like so many people live like for after work or on the weekends or holidays, vacations, and being able to like have a life where you can spend time with your kids, especially while they're so small. It's like, it goes so fast and we just don't get this time back with them. While still being able to do stuff that you guys are excited about is really cool.
That's the idea, the hope.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it sounds like you guys have done a really great job with it. It's really inspiring to hear.
Thanks. I mean, y'all too. We met you in Kanazawa, Japan. So
I also think it's really funny that it's like the dads that met each other with like the babies.
We're sitting out. Okay. Ryan glossed over this, but I think this is the funniest way I've ever ended up on a podcast. Like we're sitting outside waiting for the coffee shop to open with our babies. And we're like, yeah, I feel like we're just based off this interaction, we probably have quite a few things in common. Like we're both clearly not Japanese. Like we're here, we're waiting for coffee. Everything that's okay. Sidebar,
everything
tangent.
Is closed.
Everything.
You don't, it's such a easy world problem to have, but it's like our kids are waking up at 5 a.m. every morning, and other countries are not as convenient as like the US and Canada, where things are open all the time. And so anyway, that wasn't my only time to like wait for a place to open to get a cup of coffee.
It's funny, we have a friend here who's visiting Mexico. She's from New Zealand but lives in Australia. We were actually just talking about that with her. The city we live in kind of has the same thing where it's like tons of cafes, but they all open at like 8, 10, or 11. And like a new cafe will open. You're like, sweet, this is awesome. It opens at 8 too. And you're like, you guys could sell so much more coffee if you just like opened it.
Yes.
I think 8 is a stretch though, too, because I think there's a lot of them that are like 9 or 10. Like the city we live in is like sleeping until like 10 a.m. And I'm like, our daughter's like ready for a nap by then. She's been up for like four hours probably. It's like nap time. But it was nice because when we arrived in Tokyo, we had the jet lag. And so I think she was waking up at like, I remember it was like 4:50 a.m. And I'm like, this is a great city to be doing that because Tokyo actually does have a lot of stuff open. Like we're like, great, let's go hit the fish market at 5 a.m.
Yeah. I walked through the Kanazawa fish market, I want to say, before like it was actually open. I was like, oh, just walk around and see them setting up. This is fun. It's entertainment.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate you guys' time. If people want to catch up and follow what you guys are doing online, where would the best place to do that be?
Just heathandalyssa.com or Heath and Alyssa on Instagram, or we've been sharing some YouTube videos as well under Heath and Alyssa. So
perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure there's links to all of that. And just, thank you guys so much for your time. And hopefully we can just keep in touch and maybe we can meet up again somewhere else in the world.
Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out the World Wanderers Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.